Hardly any buildings were spared in this earthquake, and so the hospital here in the junta-controlled capital of Naypyidaw has had to move outside. A long line of the injured, a line and list set to grow in coming days. Today the military leader made a visit, but General Min Aung Hlaing kept his distance from the nurses and the wounded, seemingly not here to offer words of comfort, but to show some form of control. The general also travelled to Mandalay, close to the epicenter, pointing, staring, looking at a phone, viewing buildings that looked largely unscathed. Because this city appears hardest hit by the biggest earthquake to strike Myanmar in 100 years. Rescuers have been toiling through the ruins. Today, this woman joined the list of survivors. But elsewhere, the outcome for rescue workers was devastating. After drilling through the rubble at this building in Mandalay, 2 more victims were recovered. The death toll is now above 1,600 and expected to rise.
I was on a call with colleagues, and there's a town near Mandalay that hasn't really been featured in the news, and 80% of it's been reported as destroyed by our partners and staff. So this is only just coming out now because of the lack of telecommunications. So I think what we know is that the level of destruction, it's going to grow, and we really don't know the full scale of it yet.
The 7.7 magnitude earthquake occurred at 12:50 local time on Friday, the result of the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates rubbing alongside one another. A second quake struck minutes later with a magnitude of 6.4. The fault line was long and shallow, 200 kilometers in length and a depth of around 6 miles. That meant violent shaking was felt not just near the epicenter, close to Myanmar's second largest city, Mandalay, but down to Naypyidaw too. Those 2 cities are under the control of the junta, which only holds pockets of land since the 2021 military coup. The majority of the nation is now in the hands of the opposition, made up of pro-democracy militias, ethnic armies, and local defense forces. With infrastructure crippled in a nation ravaged by a civil war leaving millions displaced, the United Nations said that Myanmar was now facing a polycrisis, essentially a crisis upon a crisis upon a crisis. The junta has invited any country to provide help and donations. Today saw China dispatch teams of rescue workers. Russia did too, sending 120 personnel from Moscow. A cargo plane from India arrived in Yangon, supplying tents, food and medicine. The delivery met by junta officials, the optics of a regime embracing outside help at the same time as continuing the fighting. It was only the day before the earthquake that the junta held a parade to commemorate Armed Forces Day, a show of strength that continued even after the disaster, with the regime launching airstrikes and drone attacks on rebel areas yesterday and today. This disaster has damaged historic and religious sites. The military regime here is notoriously superstitious, with generals reliant on astrologers and fortune tellers. But the people of Myanmar don't need leaders obsessed with talismans or omens. They need humanitarian help. With international aid set to arrive, can it overcome not just the physical obstacles left by this earthquake, but avoid getting tied up in the politics of a brutal conflict?
Well, the quake also rocked parts of Thailand, including the capital Bangkok. According to the authorities, 11 people have been found dead, 32 were injured, and more than 80 others are still missing. Many of them had been working near a tower block, which was brought crashing to the ground when the quake struck. Emergency teams have brought in heavy equipment to search under the rubble, with the hunt for survivors now continuing into a second night. Well, Vicky Bowman is a former British ambassador to Myanmar, and her husband, an artist, is still in the country. Both have previously been imprisoned by the military junta. She's here with me now. First of all, then, how is your husband?
He's safe and well, thank you. He was travelling up towards Mandalay yesterday when the quake hit, and he described to me a bit later how he was sort of thrown from one side of the road to the other. Luckily, got the car under control and continued on the journey up into the hills. And that area where our village, or our house is in the village, is more or less unaffected. But even nearby, and we're talking here now, maybe 100 miles east of Mandalay, there are collapsed hotels, there are casualties. Inle Lake, which is a tourist region that a lot of people who've been to Myanmar will have gone to, has something like 75 casualties. These are houses on stilts, so not what you'd expect. But some of the people died because they fell into the water and were electrocuted by live wires.
Yeah, and you are still in contact today with people who are out there, and it's difficult to reach them, isn't it? So what are you hearing?
It's very difficult to reach Mandalay. The internet signal is very off and on. Electricity throughout the country, including in the town where my husband now lives and in our house, is off. People around at cafes sort of charging their phones with generators. Right now it's night time, so I imagine that the entire city of Mandalay is pretty much dark because very few people have got the wherewithal to run an all-night search. So it's a really desperate situation, and we're only starting to hear the news from some of the smaller towns, which are slightly more remote, as to how badly they've been affected.
Can I just get your reaction to this breaking news in the last few minutes that the main resistance in Myanmar has declared a partial ceasefire to help with the earthquake relief efforts? What do you make of that offer?
I think it's really positive if people will stop fighting and focus on rescue. I mean, I think it's too early to say how this will impact on Myanmar's politics, but it certainly is not going to be helpful for either side to be mounting armed offensives against one another at a time when what we need to be doing is saving lives. There are other things I think that could be done.
Just before we move on to that, because at the same time, there are reports that the military government has continued its bombing campaign. How much of a worry is that?
I mean, I think that part of the problem is, the fog of war and getting in accurate information is something that's a real challenge in Myanmar, even in the best of times, and certainly now. But I think it would be a very positive thing if we saw a bilateral ceasefire. And in fact, we're not talking just about bilateral, because Myanmar has multiple ethnic conflicts as well as the sort of main one between the military and the majority, who are mostly young people.
Who's going to control the flow of aid? And is there enough of it going to be coming in for the scale of the devastation that's there?
I mean, I think there's a mixture of issues here. So one is simply financial resources. And we've seen big cuts to aid budgets, particularly from the US. So that's the first question. It's good to see some of these rescue teams coming in from some of the neighbouring countries in particular. I think that once we get to the delivery of aid, it's something which there are people on the ground. There's the World Food Programme, UNICEF, some of the UN agencies, some of the international NGOs who have been there, who understand how to deliver aid in the easier to reach areas. And then there are also local groups.
But we've had this offer now from the resistance to declare a ceasefire to help with the earthquake relief efforts. Is there any sign at all the military government is going to take them up on it, is going to go enter into dialogue with them, going to work together?
I mean, as you say, Kieran, that just happened when we came on air. So I think it's too early to say. But I hope that, for example, as a sign of trying to help people, some of these blocks on the internet could be lifted. I mean, one of the things that we're finding is that there's a problem with people simply getting online to Facebook, even if they do get a connection, because they have to use VPNs to avoid blockages.
Very, very briefly, is this the moment that Myanmar begins to open up, or do the junta use this to their advantage?
I think it's so difficult to predict the politics right now. What is absolutely sure is that this country couldn't afford an earthquake in terms of humanitarian and livelihoods. So it's really tragic from that perspective.
Vicky Bowman, former UK ambassador to Myanmar, thank you so much for joining us.